My name is Otto. I used to be Mr. Otto. Now I'm just an old man in a knitted hat who's lived too long. I live in a house on the edge of town that I built with my own hands. The windows haven't been washed in a long time. The walls have sagged a little, like the shoulders of a man who's tired of carrying himself. But the house is holding up, and so am I. I used to have everything. A company, hundreds of employees, an authority that weighed more than any deal. People trusted me. They listened. They bowed their heads when I entered the hall. My word was law at home and at work. And now my children only come into this house when they need to sign something or take out old furniture. "Dad, give me back this wardrobe. It's just right for our office," says my son Artem, not looking me in the eye. "Grandpa, why are you calling?" "I'm on the fence," grumbles my grandson when I, not myself, dial the number in the hope that someone will just want to hear my voice. I don't call often. Less and less. Because I already know the answer. In the store, they talk to me as if I were deaf. Slowly, irritatedly. One of the girls at the checkout once said, "That grumbling grandfather has come again." And I stood there and listened. And swallowed it like a bitter pill without washing it down. Because how else? What will I do? Do I dare to answer? In the hospital, the nurse threw my cardboard medical file away, as if it were not my fate, but a crumpled package. "You need to come to terms with your age," said the doctor. "You are not the first, and you will not be the last." These words had everything: indifference, arrogance, and most frighteningly the truth. Because I really am not the first. I am the next one. One of the thousands of old people who cease to exist in the eyes of society as soon as they stop being heard. The kitchen is quiet. The old radio occasionally wheezes, as if trying to say something but can't. I talk to myself. Sometimes I even laugh, imagining that someone answered. Once upon a time, I would gather my family for the holidays. I would put a bottle of wine on the table, pour it into glasses, tell stories even the grandchildren would listen. Now photos. They throw them into the chat, like someone throwing a bone to a dog. "Grandpa, here's Marinka at graduation. Look." And that's it. No call. No words. I get up at 5 in the morning. Although there's no point in it anymore. I throw it into the stove, make 1 cup of coffee. I look out the window. The trees have become strangers. I live as if I woke up in another world where I don't exist. People walk past my house without noticing. I used to build this area. I personally laid tiles near the bus stop opposite. And now the young people throw garbage there, spit, and don't notice that I'm sitting on the bench next to them. And in every gesture there's that ruthless indifference. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't directly insult. It just permeates with silence. It makes you feel like you're superfluous. I notice something new appearing inside me. No, not anger. It's rotting. The slow decay of dignity. When you sit with your back to the wall and you feel you haven't been pushed, but you've been turned away. I didn't know then what would happen next. But even then, sitting on an old wooden chair by the window, I started writing in a notebook. A notebook with black pages. In it I wrote down dates and prescriptions for medicines. I wrote down names. When I look in the mirror, sometimes I see myself as I was. In the eyes of the old man are traces of who I was, determined, purposeful, fearless. And no one cared how many nights I stayed awake, how many times I was forced to remain silent, to swallow humiliation for the sake of the cause, for the sake of the future. My path began in the swamp. In the 90s, I carried bricks on construction sites, dragging more weight than my back would allow. I slept in trailers, ate from disposable containers. I was deceived, thrown at for money, beaten. But I rose. I had no father. I had no example. I built everything from scratch. The All-Star Group company was my sweat, my blood, my faith. I created it literally from nothing. I was feared, respected. But most importantly, I was listened to. I had principles. I never abandoned people in trouble, even those who did not deserve it. One of my accountants stole a few thousand from my account. I didn't call the police. I just made him look me in the eye. He cried, and I kept quiet. Then he stayed working for another 10 years, now loyal as a dog. I raised my children strictly, but with love. I bought them the best. I took my son to university, bought him his first car. My daughter wanted to go to art school. I didn't understand this, but I paid. Because you can't put limits on dreams. I remember how they hugged me around the neck when they were little. How my son Artem used to say, "Dad, you're the strongest." And then, the world slowly began to take over. First business. New rules, new markets came. I wasn't so fast anymore. The people I raised started doing business without me. "Dad, we just want to make your life easier," Artem would say. And then a house. I moved to a smaller one on the outskirts. "It will be calmer, you need silence," my daughter said. And I believed her. Silence. Silence, which became my loudest enemy. Then Lita left. My wife, the only one who saw me at my worst. She is no more. She was my last call at night. And now, only a voice in my memory, which sometimes tells me not to give up. I stood alone at her grave. My children sent flowers. Flowers. But they didn't come. Business trips. Exams. All of this was more important than my mother's funeral. My grandchildren. I don't know what I am to them. Just an old man with outdated views? I once tried to tell my grandson how to keep his word. And he said, "Grandpa, this is not the 20th century. You are not in the league to tell stories." And it was honest. Rude, painful, but honest. I gave this world more than I had. I pulled my family out of the mud, raised them, taught them, provided for them. And today I am left alone. Like a person who saved everyone from a burning house. But everyone else ran out and forgot who opened the door for them. When I leaf through old photo albums, my hands tremble a little. Here I am against the background of the factory. Young, strong, smiling. Here are my children in new jackets. Here is Lita, with a white scarf and a warm look. I am no longer sure that those photos are about me, because the man in them is a hero, and I, only his shadow. I learned to be silent. I learned to look at the floor when I was cut with words. I learned to stand straight when my name was spoken with a hint of fatigue or regret. But that doesn't mean I stopped feeling. These trials didn't come suddenly. They dripped like rain soaking a stone. And now that stone was starting to crack. It started small, with phone calls that weren't answered. "Sorry, Dad, I don't have time to talk," Artem would say. "Sorry, Grandpa, I'm not here right now," my granddaughter would write back. I invited them to dinner. I cooked borscht, prepared dishes they once loved. No one came. "We have things to do. We're busy. Busy with a life that has no place for me." Once I asked Artem to help me move heavy things from the garage. He arrived after 3 weeks, and then, for 15 minutes, as if he was doing his duty. "You're strong. He could have done it himself. I can't run to you every time." I silently watched him walk away. There was no pity in his steps, only convenience. That evening I wrote in my notebook, Artem. April 24th. It didn't help. My grandson came with his girlfriend. She didn't say hello. I tried to start a conversation, to tell him something interesting about business, about life. He rolled his eyes. "But who lives like that these days? You don't understand anything, grandfather. Sit down and rest." I'd never hit him. not even mentally. But after those words, I realized for the first time that something was changing in me. It wasn't anger. It was cold. A cold I hadn't felt even in winter, when I was freezing in a trailer at a construction site. I felt sick in the hospital. I was waiting in line, pressing my hand to my chest. A young doctor came up to me. He looked at me contemptuously. "You're just old age. Your heart is tired. There's nothing we can do." And in general, the next one. I sat on a bench in front of the clinic and cried. Silently, hiding my face in my hands. It wasn't death. It was a small death. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in drops. Another drop was in the supermarket. I tried to get groceries off the shelf. My hand trembled. A bag of pasta fell. I squatted down, lifting my body with difficulty. People walked by. Someone walked around. Someone grumbled. They could have stayed home and not bothered. And a girl of about 20 laughed out loud and whispered to her friend, "Look, Baba Yaga is shopping." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the ground. Something inside snapped. I felt my heart clench. Not from pain, from shame. I was no longer Otto. I was simply old. In the evening, I opened my notebook. I wrote down new names. I don't know who they are, but I haven't forgotten the faces. I began to remember. Not only the images, but also the people I had once dealt with. People whom the world didn't like, but who always had the means. Old connections. I hadn't decided what I would do yet. But I already knew I wouldn't let the world swallow me like a bone. I silently prepared. I didn't sleep at night. I turned on the table lamp. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Coldly, through the broken teeth of time. Because every one of their indifferences is a gift. It's an excuse. And everyone who forgot me will soon remember. I always thought that the worst thing about old age was joint pain, shortness of breath, and minor household restrictions. No. The worst thing was the moment when you reached out for help and saw people pretending you weren't there. That day was cold, piercing, as if time itself had turned against me. I went to the town center to buy some bread, cereals, and medicine. Nothing superfluous. I never asked for much. After the checkout, I went outside. The wind tore the packages from my fingers. I was holding two, too heavy, but I was stubborn, as Lita said. She always smiled when I resisted. But now there was no smile. And then the handle of one of the packages broke. The cans of canned food fell to the sidewalk. One rolled right under the feet of some guy in headphones. I bent down, felt an unbearable pull on my lower back, but still held out my hand. "Excuse me, can you help me?" The guy looked at me the way you look at old leaves that stick to your shoe. He smiled crookedly, indifferently. "Grandpa, can't you do it yourself?" And lazily kicked the can away without even bending down. His girlfriend laughed. "Look at him," she said. "Fall? Then lie down. No one owes you anything." I wanted to answer, but the words got stuck like a bone in my throat. I looked at them, pressing my hand to the asphalt, trying to get up. And they stood and laughed, two kids, who hadn't even turned 40 yet. Then a group of teenagers on skateboards drove up. One saw me trying to collect groceries and shouted, "Take a picture. This will be a meme." They laughed. They wanted to make a joke of me. And that was the moment. The moment when something inside me came back. It was as if I heard a distant bell that had once rung in my office when I made decisions that would affect entire lives. That bell was cold, metallic, precise. I slowly raised my head. My gaze was not the gaze of an old man. No. It was the gaze of the same Otto who had once been feared by his competitors, who had been called a man of his word, a man of iron will. a gaze that always predicted 3 moves ahead. The guy who had laughed the loudest suddenly fell silent. He took a step back. I didn't say a word. But something inside me was no longer ringing. It was ringing. I gathered my things. Slowly, unhurriedly. I went home. When I closed the door, the silence in my house changed. It was no longer empty. It was no longer cold. It became precise, formed. I sat down at the table, opened a black notebook. And for the first time, I didn't just write down names, I circled them. Then I wrote new ones. Not only those who humiliated me, but also those who should have protected me. Artem, Marina, doctor, cashier, guy with headphones, teenagers, date, time, circumstances. I didn't tremble. I didn't hesitate. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to fight, break bones. No. I've always been stronger in other things, in precise actions, in correct connections, in psychological knots that people tighten around their necks if they're pushed a little. When the sun went down, I took a metal box out of the old safe. In it were the cards, addresses, and phone numbers of people I'd once worked with. Not all of them were bright, but all of them were effective. I sat in the dark, touching the tops of these cards. And I thought, not of revenge, of balance. The world had made me invisible. But now I would reappear, not as a victim, as a player. And everyone who once laughed would hear the silence from which Otto had returned. I wasn't going to break their lives. I was only going to touch their fears. The fears they hid under smiles, social media statuses, new cars, and expensive words. They thought they were strong. But the strong are the ones who know how to wait. I had time. And there was something better than a weapon, memory. I took out an old phone with buttons. I pulled out a SIM card that had long been waiting for its time. I scrolled through a few numbers. The first one I dialed was Pavel Sotnik. We used to work together. Then he disappeared into dark matters, hiding in the shadows. But they remember him. And he remembers me. Otto? I need information, I said briefly. No one should know. In a few days, I gained full access to Artem's data, his finances, email, bank account activity. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. The perfect father, he wrote about himself on LinkedIn. But the dossier had something else. Secret expenses, hush betrayal, hidden debts. A few strokes, and I forwarded the letter to his wife. Not from me. Anonymously. With 2 facts. Enough. Her silence the next day in the family chat became the first crack. With Marinka, my granddaughter, it was more difficult. She is still young. But proud? She had a mentor at the university. A person who wrote for her coursework for money. I just sent the faculty an anonymous letter with an excerpt of the correspondence. Not fiction. Just the truth. She was summoned to a commission. Her reputation was ruined. Not destroyed. Just a little shaken. With the guy in headphones, everything was different. I found a video of him throwing a bottle at a grandmother in the crosswalk. A year ago. The recording was forgotten. I passed it on to the local community. The spread was lightning fast. The outrage was instant. He was summoned to work. They asked him to explain. He was fired. I didn't point a finger at anyone. I just directed events. I made them see themselves from the outside. Artem and his daughter started arguing. The first conflicts appeared in the family chat. The granddaughter became withdrawn. The daughter, who had lived for years confident that she had everyone in her hands, suddenly found herself at the center of the quarrel after her friends suddenly found out about a long-standing deception in a charity project. This was not an exposure. This was a mirror. I didn't come I didn't speak. I was just a quiet force that they didn't see, but felt. Even the doctor who humiliated me suddenly found himself at the center of an internal investigation. A complaint was filed with the clinic with an audio recording of several patients. One of them was me. The second was a staged voice. Not mine, but well-made. I asked an old acquaintance from the past about it. The one who worked in advertising. The doctor was temporarily suspended. No one understood where this silence was coming from. But it was with everyone. I felt the house changing. It was no longer cold. It was my fortress. I sat in a chair, drank coffee, listened to the radio and smiled. Now, when they remembered me, a new intonation appeared in their voices. Not fear. No. Wariness. Respect. Doubt. For the first time in years, they began to remember who I was. And who I remained. I did not break them. I made them look into the eyes of my filth. Because true revenge is not in blood. In awareness. When a person faces the truth about themselves, they break or grow. They began to come. One by one. Dad, maybe I could come in sometime. Grandpa, don't you want to talk? And me? I answered calmly, with a cup of tea in my hands, with a straight back. Yes, come in. If you really need to. If not, just like that. And in every word, my victory. Quiet. Cold. Without evidence. But undeniable. I look at my reflection in the dark kitchen window, and it no longer scares me. It looks back at me, sparingly, without bowing, without pleading. This person sees what I did, not a scream, not a destruction, but a cold, precise mirror response. She knows that in the days when I was ignored, I not only suffered, I learned. They came in a different way than I expected. The children, not immediately with requests for forgiveness. They came with questions, with apprehension, with the need to justify themselves to those they had offended. The grandchildren, with worn eyes, but no longer so proud. The people who laughed in the supermarket turned out to be not so safe. They lost their jobs, the trust of their colleagues, a few reputational blows, and their jokes fell silent. I was not amused by their pain. I created the conditions in which the truth took place. I held up the mirror so that everyone could see their own face in it, the blurred contours of boasting, the shadows of lies, the rust of indifference. Sometimes the mirror cracked, and someone got scared. Another finally thought about it. My family was in pain. They felt that they had lost not only money or positions, but also a part of their inner purity. Artem cried into the phone, no longer out of shame in front of others, but out of shame in front of herself. Marina stood by the window and looked at her phone, as if waiting for it to tell her who she was. I didn't humiliate them. I simply brought things down to a certain level of honesty. Some decided to fight. Some decided to admit. Both paths were difficult. Society changed, not instantly, but noticeably. People began to look each other in the face more often. Small gestures returned. Doors were held. Stores became more welcoming. Doctors learned to listen. Is it my merit? Partially. I sowed a seed that grows as shame or as conscience depending on the soil in which it was planted. My revenge brought no joy. It was quiet and cold, like morning fog. After all, I understood the main thing. It is not revenge that makes a person complete, but the return of dignity. When they began to see me as a person with stories, mistakes, truth, I felt that something in me was falling into place again. Not a victory over them, but a renewal of myself. Many say that old age is the end. I will say it differently. Old age is a different form of power. It does not shout, does not call for barricades. It knows how to wait, accumulate, remember. I used what I had, experience, connections, patience, and most importantly what no one could borrow from me, and will not steal my story. What I gave to the world returned to it not in the form of a loud triumph, but in a quiet demand for responsibility. I did not become a tormentor. I did not want to break. I wanted everyone who looked at me with contempt to feel the tremor of doubt, which deals a greater blow than a curse. I wanted my children to understand that success without the memory of the people who created it is an empty beauty. That grandchildren who laughed at someone else's downfall can lose their own integrity faster than the grades they got in college. And now, when all these consequences have already echoed in people's lives, I live with a new shaky silence. It is calmer than the former emptiness, but heavy with realization. Sometimes I ask myself if I've gone too far. The answer comes from the same place where the order once came. When you're spat on, you either bend over or take a step back and learn not to be comfortable. I chose the latter. The children came. They brought flowers and conversations that sounded like excuses. They asked not immediately for an apology, but at least for a conversation. I listened. And I answered not with a shout, but with a meaningful silence or a simple, I saw. I remember. Now you see. There was a mixture of shame and understanding in their eyes. It was not a victory. It was a lesson. I learned not to forgive automatically. Forgiveness is not a year or two of kindness. Forgiveness is an act that comes from strength, not weakness. I gave them a chance to go through it, like a cleansing. Someone passed. Someone circled everything back into a protective shell. But no one looks at me anymore as if I were an extra detail. I wasn't applauded. No one lifted me up in their arms without shouting. But I felt something else, something that medals don't give. Respect that can't be bought. In the same respect, both my victory and my defeat. Because I lost something, the illusion of a family that was unconditional. But in return, I gained something that is harder and more valuable, my own dignity, the restored ability to dictate the terms of my life. In the evening, I opened my black notebook. The names remain there, the frames are weathered, the dates are written. I put my pen next to it and know, this notebook is not for the sacred joy of revenge. It is like a testimony to the fact that I was forgotten and how I made the world look again. And when I go out to the bench near my house, people look at me with a different intonation. Not with horror, not with surprise, but with respect. Young people who once laughed, sometimes cool down, passing by, slightly lower their gaze as a sign of apology or understanding. Will this change their lives forever? Maybe not. But the consequence is there. I have learned to love my old age not as a defeat, but as a tool. I have learned to hold my shoulders proudly, even if those shoulders are tired. My strength is not in my muscles, it is in the history I carry, in the silence that can be which cannot be bought. In the same respect, both my victory and my defeat. Because I lost something, the illusion of a family that was unconditional. But in return, I gained something that is harder and more valuable, my own dignity, the restored ability to dictate the terms of my life. In the evening, I open my black notebook. The names remain there, the frames are weathered, the dates are written out. I put my pen next to it and know, this notebook is not for the sacred joy of revenge. It is like a testimony to the fact that I was forgotten, and to how I made the world look again. And when I go out onto the bench near my house, people look at me with a different intonation. Not with horror, not with surprise, but with respect. Young people who once burst into laughter, sometimes cool down, passing by, slightly lower their gaze as a sign of apology or understanding. Will this change their lives forever? Maybe not. But the fact is already there, the consequence. I have learned to love my old age not as a defeat, but as a tool. I have learned to hold my shoulders proudly, even if those shoulders are tired. My strength is not in my muscles, it is in the history I carry, in the silence that can be which cannot be bought. In the same respect, both my victory and my defeat. Because I lost something, the illusion of a family that was unconditional. But in return, I gained something that is harder and more valuable, my own dignity, the restored ability to dictate the terms of my life. In the evening, I open my black notebook. The names remain there, the frames are weathered, the dates are written out. I put my pen next to it and know, this notebook is not for the sacred joy of revenge. It is like a testimony to the fact that I was forgotten, and to how I made the world look again. And when I go out onto the bench near my house, people look at me with a different intonation. Not with horror, not with surprise, but with respect. Young people who once burst into laughter, sometimes cool down, passing by, slightly lower their gaze as a sign of apology or understanding. Will this change their lives forever? Maybe not. But the fact is already they're the consequence. I have learned to love my old age not as a defeat, but as a tool. I have learned to hold my shoulders proudly, even if those shoulders are tired. My strength is not in my muscles, it is in the history I carry, in the silence that can be.
Subscribe and like. And tell your friends about this video.